Alrighty, what's up YouTubers? This is Max. I'm here with your weekly warm-up. This week we're dealing with the idea of counterexample, so we're going to do some exercises that run y'all through some of that. In the first part we're dealing with validity testing, and we're dealing specifically with the imagination test for invalidity, which runs for any argument, if you can coherently imagine a situation in which the premises are all true and the conclusion is false, then you may conclude that the argument is invalid. So when we're caring about validity, we're not caring about the actual truth of the premises. We're just saying, suppose the premises are true. If the premises were true, then is it necessarily true for the conclusion to be true in every case? Now, if you can find one case where both premises are true, or however many premises are true, and the conclusion is false, then you found a counterexample, and that means that the argument is invalid. Okay? Valid arguments don't have any counterexamples. So let's run through a couple of these examples that I've put together. First one is, it must be the case that I am a kangaroo because all kangaroos are bipedal. That just means walk around on two legs, and I am bipedal. So the argument runs, all kangaroos are bipedal, I am bipedal, therefore I'm a kangaroo. Now, this is an invalid argument, not just because I'm not a kangaroo in real life, but because there's a way for me to not be a kangaroo even if these two things are true. So notice that this says all kangaroos are bipedal, but it doesn't say that kangaroos are the only thing that's bipedal, right? So in this world, I could just be a human that's bipedal, right? And so that's a counterexample to this argument. And this is what's called affirming. This argument does what's called affirming the consequent, which is a logical fallacy, something we'll get to in a little bit, but it basically says that it is true that if I am a kangaroo, then I'm bipedal, but that doesn't necessarily mean that if I'm bipedal, then I'm a kangaroo. Make sense? Okay. This next one runs slightly differently. Only philosophers make warm-up videos for their students, so I must be a philosopher since I am making this warm-up video. So it runs these premises 1, 2, and then the conclusion. And this is a valid argument. And I'll show you why. Since this says only philosophers make warm-up videos for their students, and so in this case, in this world, philosophers are the only types of people who do this task. So if I'm doing this task, it must mean that I belong to that group of people, right? There's no other way for me for this one to be true without the conclusion being true. The conclusion necessarily follows from the premises, and that's what we call a valid argument. Okay, moving right along. The next thing we're dealing with is, oops, got that wrong. Next thing we're dealing with is what kinds of arguments can there be? So we're looking here, we've got these in which we're told that the argument either has all true premises or some false premises, invalid or valid reasoning, and a false or true conclusion. And our goal is to give an argument that has these qualities, or if we can't, explain why it's logically impossible, or it's impossible according to the laws of logic, for an argument to have all. So I'll just run through two real quick. I'm not sure which letters these refer to, but you should be able to figure it out. So this one has all true premises, invalid reasoning, and a false conclusion. So the premises are, I used to live in Florida, that's true, I'm from Florida originally. I currently live in Arizona, that's also true, otherwise the commute would just be a nightmare. And I must have moved from Florida to Arizona. Now, this is invalid reasoning, specifically because there is a way for this conclusion to be false when these premises are true, which is that I didn't move from Florida to Arizona. In fact, I moved from North Carolina to Arizona, because there's nothing in here that says these are the only. Now, if this argument had an additional premise that said I've only ever lived in Florida and Arizona, then it must have been the case that I moved from Florida to Arizona, but that's not true. I lived in North Carolina between those two, and therefore both of these are true, but they leave out an important premise, which means that this is an invalid argument and this is a false conclusion. Now, number two, some false premises, valid reasoning, and a true conclusion. So premise one, all turtles speak Hebrew. Obviously that's false. Premise two, if I had a turtle, I would name it Terry, that can be either true or false. It doesn't really matter since we already have one false premise. I do not speak Hebrew. That's true, incidentally. And then the conclusion, if I had a turtle, we would not be able to speak to each other. So we do have a false premise or two false premises, depending on whether I actually would name a turtle Terry. But it is valid reasoning. So if these three things were in fact true, then it would need to be the case that if I had a turtle, we would not be able to speak to each other because it would speak Hebrew and I would speak another language, English, right? And also, this conclusion is in fact true. If I had a turtle, we would not be able to speak to each other. But that's really more a case of turtles not speaking any language at all, rather than them only speaking Hebrew.